Do you know what, Stu? I think we're doing it. I think we're live. We're live on Twitch. Live. We're live.
Oh my God.
Hello, folks, and everybody who is there watching today. Welcome to Tales from the 20 Side, actual play Pathfinder 2nd Edition podcast. My name is Dom. I am the GM for the game, and I'm joined by my good friend over here, Mr. Stu Jackson, who is one of my players. Stu, why don't you tell everybody who's joining us a bit about who we are and what we're here to do today?
So Dom runs the actual play game Tales from the 20 Side, which, as mentioned, Pathfinder 2nd Edition actual play podcast, based on the Reign of Winter adventure path, which is a first edition adventure path. We'll come back onto that later. So we've hit a real milestone. One I'm quite surprised we've survived to hit, where we've reached the end of book 1, haven't we?
We have indeed. The last episode that we released, which went out last Saturday, am I correct? Yeah, it must be.
Yes, it did, yes. Yeah. Well, it goes out sort of at midnight on Saturday, so either Saturday night or Sunday morning, depending where you are in the world. As
I'm sure you're all aware, time is very, very weird at the moment. So I did just have to check what days were for a second there. That's all that was.
Time is an abstract concept that's meaningless to us.
It might as well be, hey. But yeah, anyway, so as Stu has mentioned, we thought we were originally going to have this week completely off the podcast, so we could all do things like rest and see our families. God, who'd have thought that was a good idea? But we have decided to bring you a special episode. Episode is the wrong word. A special interaction, I think, is a better word. Where Stu is going to ask some questions, and I'm going to answer them as best of my ability as a GM. So before we kick off with that, it's got a couple of little bits of housekeeping to go through. So obviously we are talking about in some cases we are talking about events that have happened in the story, some fairly recently. So a fair warning to all you podcast listeners out there. There may be a couple of spoilers that creep in here and there, but I will do my best to keep this as spoiler free as possible, so I don't spoil the listening experience of those of you who are still catching up. And as we've mentioned before, we are running Tales from 20 Side, which is a Pathfinder 2nd Edition Let's Play podcast. It's a weekly adventure, and you can find that and listen into it if you're not already. There is a link somewhere on a description. This is my first time on Twitch. I don't know where I'm going to point, so I'm just going to point in all directions. Somewhere there will be a link to the main podcast itself, as well as to all of our various social media accounts. You can find us on Facebook, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Discord, anything like that. Just search for Tales from the 20 Side and we should appear. But with all that out of the way, Stu, I think we're ready to get into the interview, aren't we?
Absolutely. So so the first question... Well, actually, before we get into that, I want to ask how your New Year's been so far, Dom.
Well, there's only been 2 days of it, so it's not been that...
essential. New Year's Eve. So Happy New Year to all our listeners, of course, and to everyone else out there. I think that's quite a good thing to say, but... Did you? Do you know what? I'm losing the will to speak here suddenly. So yeah, let's dive into these questions. What the hell? So the first question I wanted to ask you, Dom, in particular, and I know role-playing games in particular are quite an important aspect of your life, and indeed we play a social game and have done for a few years now.
2 years, in fact. How about time gone?
It's 2 years. 2 years feels like 10. And of course, we do Tales from the Twin Side. We've done other things as well. What is it about role-playing games that drew you in the first place?
Do you know what it is, Stu? What it boils down to for me when I'm thinking about role-playing games is it's just, at its most basic, it's escapism. Is all it is, really. You know, there's so many, let's say, things happening in the world that it's nice to have a world that you can retreat to, where not that there are no problems. You know, even fantasy worlds have their own issues to deal with, but they offer a reprieve from the real world. They offer you a chance to be someone you're not. They offer you a chance to be someone you wish you could be. You know, perhaps a heroic adventurer fighting through a jungle, or sailing a ship across a raging ocean. It's all just things that you never get to do, or most of us never get to do in our actual lives. And that's really the hook for me. And the way that tabletop RPGs kind of drew me in more than, say, a video game does, although I am quite a big video game fan as well, is that when you're playing a TTRPG, there is a legitimate amount of freedom that you have. You know, you can be anything you can imagine. You can go anywhere that you and your friends can imagine as a world, which is often a limitation of other forms of escapism. You know, you're very much limited to the world that's been presented to you by the author or the game designer or the film producer, which are all fantastic forms of entertainment in their own right, but none of them have the same freedom that you get from a TTRPG.
Very, very well said. So the listeners are going to know you as the GM, but you mentioned one of the big draws for you was this opportunity to play a heroic character, which for anyone who listens to Tales from the 20 Side is something I look forward to one day. But for you then, which do you prefer? Is it, because I know you as a player and I also know you as a GM, which is better?
That's quite a loaded question, Stu. Which is better, playing or GMing? I can't give a satisfying answer to that, I'm afraid, because really, and I'm sure anybody who has played and who has GM'd will agree, both are styles of engaging with the hobby that offer different things. You know, as a player, as I mentioned, you get to be this heroic adventurer traveling across the world, saving people from evil dragons, and having a functional sleep schedule. All fantastic things in their own right. And then as a GM, as a games master, you have an ability to create a world. You have an ability to... Hi, James, how you doing? Mr. Foxy Lockhart has joined us himself. As a GM, you have the ability to create a world, and you have an ability to create fun for your players. Interesting question there from B Daddy. Do I find myself inserting myself into NPCs without planning to?
I'm assuming he means in a psychological way, not in an actual, you know.
Yeah. I think I get what you're saying there, B. If I have ever done that, I've certainly not noticed it. But I'm sure that I do it, as it's just a thing, isn't it? At the end of the day, when you're portraying a character, inevitably some part of you is going to bleed into that character. But yes, to go back to the question from Stu a second ago, I would argue that playing and GMing are both two very enjoyable sides of the same coin, and I think it's unfair to say that either is better than the other, if that makes sense.
That's absolutely fair enough, although a cop-out of an answer, in my opinion.
And I still stretched it out for over 2 minutes, so there you go.
Fantastic. And that was a good question as well from B Daddy. So hello to everyone listening, and if you've just joined us, Basically, I'm interviewing Dom about his GMing of the Reign of Winter Adventure Path, as we have just completed book 1. And nice to see Foxy Lockhart joining us. Some of the regular listeners will, of course, know Foxy not only from the Danger Club podcast, but also from guesting on a special few episodes of Tales from the 20 Side, which was GM'd superbly, I have to say. Oh, thank you. Yeah, and he's loving the hat. It's one of my favourite hats. Yes. Now, mentioning Reign of Winter as an adventure path, what made you pick that particular adventure path for the podcast?
Do you know what, Stu? My decision to run Reign of Winter actually started to be formed when we were playing our social game for the very, very first time, when we were being run through Rise of the Rune Lords in Pathfinder First Edition. And you will no doubt remember, Stu, though this will be news to a lot of our listeners. In that game, I played a witch. I played a gnome witch by the name of Tigress Greenhand. He was an all-round affable chap, and he'd like to blow up dragons, which we did. It was great. But when I was kind of doing my reading around that character and figuring out how the witch class works, I came across a lot of items and a lot of references and a lot of spells that referenced Reign of Winter, because that's where they came from. And I started reading the adventure path from there, and I just really liked the idea behind it. There are some fantastic set pieces in the Reign of Winter AP. You've come across a couple of them already, and there's still more to come. But it's I was quite drawn to Reign of Winter because it's a little bit different from a lot of the Pathfinder APs out there. A lot of the Pathfinder APs are very much tied to a location, whereas Reign of Winter, this is a little bit spoilery, but I can get away with it. It's not tied to a location as such. Like, this is not, believe it or not, the Irison Adventure Path. This is the Baba Yaga Adventure Path, which has a lot more scope to it. And as we continue to play through it, you will see more of what I mean by that.
Well, certainly we've already moved from Taldor to Irison, which is quite a distance. Hello to everyone joining us. Hello to Dave, and hello to Lee. Thanks for joining us. If you have any questions for Dom or myself about Tales from the 20 Side in general, or about our adventure path and Reign of Winter that we've been following, do post them in the chat on the Twitch, or you can jump onto our Discord and message us and ask us questions there. The link's sort of somewhere down there.
Yes. I have also, just so everyone is aware, if you've never listened to the podcast before, you want some more information, I have put a link in chat to talesfromthe20side.com, which will link you to the main podcast page.
Indeed. So Dave has asked a brilliant question. He says, I think you started with 2 players who are new to role-playing games, which is absolutely right. Neil and Darren, very new to role-playing games. Did this change how you ran and approached the game at all, both as a GM and as the more experienced player, Stu? So that's to both of us. Okay, so do you want to tackle the GM side first?
I think I'll allow you to answer first, Stu.
Okay, so as a more experienced player, it's I wasn't prepared to play any differently, I'll be honest. I have found I perhaps had to take the lead a little bit more than what I expected to do. Something I'm hoping to sort of pull back a little bit from where I possibly can. And almost be a kind of guide in a way, which is an interesting dichotomy for the character of Alwyn, who is thick as shit. It's got to be said. So to be this kind of leader role when he's not the brightest in the box is an interesting place to be. I think there's a balance to be had there, and I try and walk it, and there'll be times when I get it wrong and either overdo it or underdo it, but hey, that's half the fun of the game, is getting it wrong.
It is, as you can no doubt attest to from some of your more recent adventures. All I'm saying.
Absolutely, getting a lot of things wrong.
But yeah, to sort of take that from a GM's perspective, Dave, it hasn't really changed how I run the game that much. One thing that I have had to do is I have had to constantly be mindful of the fact that these are players who, prior to coming on our podcast, have either never played a role-playing game before or have very limited experience with it, and that just manifests itself in, being aware that rules might have to be explained. Little nods in the right direction might have to be given, because if Neil and Darren are listening to this, I don't mean this in any way as a slight, but there's kind of an RPG sense that you develop the more you play and the more you run games and the more you play with people. When to learn to where you kind of learn what things you can ask to do and what things are likely to be successful, what things are likely to be unsuccessful. But really, when you're running a game for inexperienced players, it's just about giving them time. You have to give the players time to learn. To learn the whole game. Really, they've got to learn the rules. They've got to learn their classes. They've got to learn how their class interacts with other classes. They've got to learn what they're good at, what they're not so good at, what they should maybe avoid doing. Excuse me. And and again, it's just a constant effort in patience. Is all it is. You just have to understand that people might need a bit of time, but eventually that light bulb moment will come where it just clicks, and suddenly they're as at home with the system as anybody else. I must confess, I think we have been a little bit mean here, Stu, because Pathfinder, although second edition has simplified things a lot, there's still a lot of meat on those bones for a new player to take in.
It is a little bit, and I mean, I've socially played a game that you've run in with Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, was it?
It was 5th edition, yes.
5th edition, which is perhaps a simpler system to get hold of, but at the same time, I just caught sight of that question from B Daddy trying to set me up there. I'll address that in just a moment. But yeah, I think Dungeons and Dragons is probably an easier system to pick up, but at the same time, I for one like the depth that you get with Pathfinder. It makes the world more real if you're not just utilizing the same statistics for pretty much every single thing. Then I don't know. I get more realism out of Pathfinder anyway. So what is it B that is actually said? Foxes are evil all the time and they like to be drained by wizards. Yes, that is the Drain Familiar spell that James's character in the Danger Club podcast. If you're not familiar with the DCP Danger Club podcast, do Google it. They're absolutely brilliant and good friends of ours. And Drain is, it's very clear. I think James clearly plays a Skeksis now in the Danger Club podcast as opposed to a wizard. And yes, he is often known to be draining his foxes. That's when B Daddy isn't milking his bees, has been established recently. So just to come back on then about the preparations that you make for a game, on the back of Dave's question there. How much time and effort does go into preparing for a recording then? And is that really different to preparing for a normal game, or pretty much the same?
It's not. I personally, I don't think it's much different than preparing for a normal game. You know, I still make notes as I normally do. I still read through the parts of the adventure that I expect you to hit. I still prepare monster stats and all that sort of thing. The kind of biggest challenge when preparing for a podcast record, and we'll get into this a bit more later as well, is just remembering that. Ultimately, we are producing this for radio, so there's been a few occasions, and if you've ever run if you've ever run Reign of Winter, or if you own the Adventure Path, or if you've read it, there are a lot of, shall we say, extraneous encounters, particularly in this first part of the Adventure Path, the Snows of Summer. There's a lot of stuff, and a lot of kind of almost the Adventure Path sort of runs encounters in a set way, but when you're reading through them, quite a few of them are not that interesting, and so you kind of have to cherry pick which ones are going to be good, and make a good experience, not only for your players to play through, but also for the people at home who are listening to you play it. But other than that, my preparation for the podcast doesn't change much compared to my preparation for a quote-unquote regular game. And in terms of how much time it takes, that can really vary. That can be anything from half an hour to a couple of hours. Again, all dependent on dependent on a couple of things. Dependent on the set pieces that you're about to go through, and also kind of how much you've managed to over prepare beforehand, if that makes sense. Because I have had a couple of occasions where I've sort of sat down to prepare for a recording, and I'm like, oh yeah, the guys will get through all of this today. They'll get through this, and then they end up like going backwards, all that sort of thing. Okay.
I'm guessing when the team do random shit as well.
Yes,
that probably doesn't help.
It doesn't help, but that's part of that's part of the GM's code, isn't it? You just got to be prepared for your players. You've got to be prepared to lay a lovely path for your players to walk, and then expect them to just veer off it hard left anytime. Yeah. Cool. Another question in there from B. Thank you, B.
Before B's question, we had one from Foxy. Did your new players roll their own characters, or did you pre-gen them?
So everybody in our podcast made their characters from scratch. Where I was sort of sitting down with Neil and Darren to make their characters, I kind of approached it sort of. It's a bit cheesy, but I said to them to imagine kind of their favourite character from a book or a TV show, and then we try and find a way to make that character. But Neil and Darren certainly made their characters following the guidelines in the CRB. Stu, however, thought he'd be a bit more madcap. Stu decided, ladies and gentlemen, that he wanted to roll everything about his character randomly, which is why he's ended up the way he has. The only thing he decided for himself was the name of the character.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in that character that I would not have chosen. Yeah. Which is pretty much the character. But I've got to say, it's a lot of fun playing him, though. Yeah. I am having a great deal of fun with that. Yes, and then there was B Daddy's question. So is it a second edition Adventure Path, or did you convert it, or have you just left it as it is? Reign
of Winter is a first edition Adventure Path. definitely not second edition. There's a lot of there's a fair bit of conversion work that has to happen to go into this, and we will get into this once again in more detail a bit later. This was one of our questions we had pre-written, just in case nobody came in to watch. But yeah, it's been an experience so far. It is a first edition adventure path. I mean, I think the two biggest things that I've had to convert have been monster stats, because a lot of the monsters, where Reign of Winter was released sort of midway through the development life of Pathfinder 1, there's a lot of splatbook content that's featured, from the bestiary, from treasure to all that sort of thing. So I've had to homebrew a few monsters. I've had to homebrew a few magical items of treasure to give to the guys. But yeah, once you sort of get past the mechanics, yeah, there's not a whole lot to convert. The adventure itself remains the same, plays the same, the events happen the same, or you can choose to change them if you wish.
Fair enough. Fox has asked another question. This time, for me, coming back to having completely randomly rolled a character, would I do it again? I don't know, is the honest answer. Because there's pros and cons. I think if I was playing a one shot and just doing it for like a bit of fun, I'd have no qualms in doing that, just, you know, for shits and giggles. Playing a longer adventure path, I don't know, because there's a therapeutic side to putting a bit of yourself into a character and role playing that out.
It definitely is.
That is quite important to me, certainly.
There definitely is. Well, one thing I will say, Sue, sorry, just to cut you off. One advantage, certainly with our current group, that you've got, where Olwyn was pre-rolled, was sort of randomly rolled, is that by randomly rolling Olwyn, he has ended up, shall we say, suboptimal.
Oh yeah.
Which has actually worked out quite well, because when you sort of look at all three of our characters, all of our characters are suboptimal in some way. So it means that you're not outshining the group. Or we have a group of three characters who are all kind of misfits in their own right. They're not all superheroes, and in a way, it makes it a little bit more human, I think.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, I'm not I'm not a min-maxer anyway within the game. That's not how I play for the role playing, not the gaming, if that makes sense. I'm all about character, not skills or stats. So yeah, there's that. So from player characters to non-player characters. Have you got a particular favourite NPC from the story, so far, at least?
I have a couple of answers to this, actually, Stu. I have two favourites. Kind of my favourite NPC overall is actually your current companion, Nadia Petska. I think she's a fantastic character. The way she's written, she's got a lot of depth to her. There's some good history and some tragic loss as well. Just this woman who has a burning desire to find her daughter, and to make herself known in the world, as it were. So Nadia is definitely my favourite NPC overall in the game so far. In terms of my favourite NPC to run, I've kind of got to go with Rokar. Rokar Sindran of Rokar's Raiders. He was whilst he was still alive, he was a lot of fun to play. Not just in terms of his combat mechanics, but also in terms of his scheming and his plotting, and the way that your relationship with him sort of went from tenuous ally to arch nemesis and back and forth again a couple of times. I had a lot of fun running you guys through the Rokar's Raiders arc, as it were.
I mean, yeah, he was a shit, but he was a fun shit. And actually, I'm going to ask a question about that in particular. So there certainly was a time when Rokar was, I mean, you could almost say an ally of the team. And it almost felt like that could have continued had the team not taken a left turn when they did. I mean, was it ever a possibility that it could have all played out as he ended up being an ally, or was he always destined to be, an end of level bad guy?
Well, he wasn't always destined to be an end of level bad guy. And actually, a little peek behind the curtain for you. If you read through the adventure path itself, that whole interaction with Rokar isn't meant to go down quite the way that it did.
Oh, right.
That's all I'm going to say about that in particular. But that there are certainly other ways that you could have interacted with him. However, once it got to the point where, you defeated Ted Norton, you'd done for him what you said you were going to do. At that point, as far as he was concerned, you had fulfilled your usefulness, and he was going to continue about his agenda. So I'd say it probably wasn't possible for him to become a tried, true, and tested ally as such, but there was certainly scope for you to kind of coexist peacefully, if that makes sense. If the three of you had decided, you know what, we're going to leave him to it, and we're just going to head off through the Winter Portal to Irison, he would have just gone on living his life. He wouldn't. He had no desire to pursue you. You proved yourselves quite useful, but it was that all changed the second you went back to the High Sentinel Lodge. As soon as you went back there, that was a declaration of war in his eyes, and it was a slight he couldn't forgive.
No, and he didn't, because he didn't get a chance. Fantastic. So a question for you, John, again from Foxy. As a GM, and in particular in relation to this adventure path, do you have an ideal player group size? And did you encounter any advantages or disadvantages in having only 3 players? I'm saying only because I'm leading that there. Yeah. the ideal player group size might be 2.
Yeah.
I know it's not, but
Well, really, the game itself is built in such a way that 4 players is kind of the assumed party minimum, as it were. It's the assumed optimal party is 4 players. So certainly having 3 players has had it's had a few unique challenges, and it's also had a couple of boons as well. In terms of an ideal player group size, I love running with 4 players. It's a nice, concise group. It involves the least work in terms of mechanical tweaking. I probably wouldn't run with any more than 6, purely because once you start getting into larger groups, you struggle to give time in the spotlight to everybody, and also to make the game challenging and fun. I just as a bit of an aside, I do actually run a community 5th edition game that was running in we were running it in a pub, and then obviously the whole COVID lockdown thing hit, so we've moved it all entirely online, where we sort of run through Discord and such. But as part of that, we did initiate a maximum party size of 6, which has made it much more manageable as we go through. Because whilst we were in the pub, some of us were running games for 8, 9, even 10 people. Hey Jack, how you doing? Just seen you pop up at the bottom there. And by moving it online and adding into into Discord, we put in that restriction, which made it easier for all the GMs to run with. And going back to your question there, James, 6 is probably the maximum I'd like running for. My ideal size is definitely 4, and in terms of advantages, in some ways it makes it easier because you've got less players to try and share the spotlight around, as I've already said. But a definite disadvantage I have noticed is that it makes it more challenging to balance the game. And not to give too much away, but on our most recent record that hasn't gone out yet, let's just say the guys have found themselves in a little bit over their heads. And part of that has come down to, basically, for that particular encounter, I have followed the guidelines in the core rulebook for adjusting encounter strength based on number of players. And this will mean nothing to the rest of you right now, but believe it or not, Stu, that encounter is a low threat encounter.
That doesn't sound right at all, and I don't believe it. And people can listen to the next couple of episodes and decide for themselves. So we've had a couple more questions. So B Daddy has asked if you could change the classes. Would you change the classes if you could do it again, or as a DM, how do you change the adventure path to fit the player choices for the classes?
Okay.
I'm trying to, sorry, B Daddy, I'm trying to understand that question. I think he's asking, do you adjust the AP according to the classes specifically, or do you think better classes would have been? Do you think other classes would have been a better choice?
I think I understand the question. I haven't been changing that much in terms of the encounters. A lot of the encounters in the AP are already fairly varied. So you can, there's challenges for martial characters, there's challenges for spellcasters, but kind of as when you take the encounters as one whole thing, they generally, and Paizo are generally quite good at this. They're generally quite good at challenging everything with their encounter design. So to answer the question, I haven't been making that many changes to fit the player's choices of class. I do have some backstory stuff for each of them that is in the pipeline, and we are gradually working towards. But in terms of actually changing the game to suit the characters, I've not been doing that much.
Okay, that's cool.
Does that answer your question?
I hope that answers B Daddy's question. We've got the question right. Lee Foster has said, first-time listener, thoroughly enjoying it. So glad to have you on board, Lee. Do look at the main podcast. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Discord. All the links are just below in the main body, just down there. Lee asked a question, but just before Lee asked the question, D3V6 wanted to know if we want to become famous.
That's a bot account. I would ignore that.
Yeah.
And if you haven't already, do not click that link, folks.
No. But Lee does ask, what was the most challenging thing we've both found when we originally started playing? Do you want to go first on that, or shall I?
Yeah, I can do. I'm guessing when you say originally started playing, do you mean when I originally started playing RPGs at all? Or do you mean specifically with the podcast? Because I know... if this is the Lee Foster I'm thinking of, I have actually run a couple of games for Lee. We did some 5e very briefly a couple of years ago, which sadly fell apart as groups are wont to do because life gets in the way. But what was the most challenging thing I found when I originally started playing? I think for me, the biggest thing I struggled with was kind of understanding that when you're playing a role-playing game and when you're playing these characters, you are in a world where you can literally attempt to do anything, and that was kind of something that took a while for me to get my head round. But once it does happen, or once it did happen, it was very much a light bulb moment, where you're sort of in a situation. For example, you might be reading one of your abilities, and you think that it can do something cool. So you ask a question about a weird scenario, and you say, "Oh, what if I could? Could I use this to do this?" And then the GM goes, "You can try." And then you try it, and it either works, it's amazing, or it doesn't work, but it's still a really cool moment. And that light bulb moment, I think, is something that everybody who plays RPGs for long enough will have eventually. But certainly, until you have that moment of realization, I'm in this world, I can do anything, I can attempt anything, I can be anyone, all that sort of stuff. It can be difficult to get your head around how they work, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, when I first started playing, I'll be honest, it was getting my head around the rules. I think so. It's no secret, I'm a bit of an older guy. As Dom mentioned earlier, we started off our first social game a couple of years ago, and other than some basically dipping my toe in the water when I was about 18, I hadn't really done anything like it before. I'd always wanted to. So as a mature person, getting my head around the rules for the very first time, that's a lot of rules and a lot of stuff, and you don't learn things as quickly when you're older. It's perhaps impolitic to say.
There are a lot of rules, to be fair, Stu. I mean, I'm guessing you're talking about your experiences with Pathfinder as well, and Pathfinder is it's definitely not light on the old brain box. First edition.
Absolutely. I think if you've learned a system young, I think progressing to a different system is probably quite a lot easier because you've got a frame of reference to base your learning on. But learning it from scratch, that was tough. I mean, I've still got a hell of a long way to go. I know we mentioned earlier, like, about me being the more experienced person in the group. I don't consider myself an experienced player at all. I still think of myself as a total noob, because there is so much that I don't understand and don't know yet. And I'm having to look stuff up all the time. That's probably my biggest challenge, is because I don't want to be the guy who holds play up because I'm looking stuff up. So that was my biggest challenge when I started playing. Probably to this day, to an extent. I'm getting there. I am getting there, though. And it's worth it. Ultimately, I mean, you balance the negatives against the positives, and, oh yeah, it's not even a question. So yeah, there you go. Dave has asked, this might be a GM secret, in which case he says, "You've to tell me anyway, Dom." How much fudging do you do, Dom? Or do the dice always fall where they may?
I don't fudge dice rolls. I don't believe in it.
You never?
Well, saying I never fudge is probably inaccurate. There have been a couple of times where, for narrative purposes, I've felt that maybe it might be better if something happens. However, when it comes to things like combat, I definitely let the dice fall where they may. As you can attest to, Stu, I've recently put the guys onto Roll20, so that we can actually start using battle maps again whilst we're playing. And as they've seen, I've been letting all my dice roll in the open. But yeah, I mean, to say I never fudge rolls is inaccurate. I don't think there's a DM out there who doesn't nudge a dice roll in a particular direction from time to time. The issue is if you're doing it constantly, because if you're fudging most of your dice rolls or a lot of your dice rolls, what's the point in having the dice in the first place? The whole point of the dice is they are a randomizer, and they create events, and they create situations that are quite often more interesting than what you can come up with on your own. Definite no to fudging. It's something I try not to do. You're so right, Jack. Fudging should only ever occur for story reasons, and even then, it should be very, very limited.
Well, I certainly feel that there's got to be a sense of jeopardy. There's got to be, a sense of danger. Otherwise, there's no drama to it, and drama is what we feed on. So Hydra does ask a really good question here. So, what kind of big bad evil guy do we like either playing against or running? Is it one with massive plot hooks, one with huge, terrible, mindless monstrousness, or complete evil villain or anti-villain? Do you want me to go first on that one?
Yeah, I need a moment to think about that. So you go ahead, Stu.
Okay, for me, so because I do a little bit of GMing as well, but do you know what? It's going to be the same answer for both of them. It's the story. It's got to be the plot hooks, the ones where you feel invested in the character, where there is a character there. That character is so important to me. And maybe it's coming at it from the perspective of an actor. I don't know, but one where you understand them as a person. And Don mentioned Rokar earlier, and yeah, he had a very clear character, he had a very clear personality, and that was really important. Far more than, well, is he hitting us with a sword, or is he hitting us with an axe, or, is it bludgeoning damage or whatever. That kind of didn't come into it for me. It was about, who is he? What's his motivation, for want of a, better phrase. That was really, really important to me. And I would say every single time, plot hooks and character are the biggest thing ever with the big bads, with all NPCs and all PCs for me.
Yeah, I think I'd probably echo a lot of what Stu said there. When I'm writing, an ultimate villain for a campaign, they've got to be interesting to me. There's got to be a reason for them to exist in the world beyond, aha, I'm here, I smash things, you must stop me. As Stu says, they need to exist in the world. They need to be a person in the world. They need to have their own motives, their own resources, their own all that sort of stuff. And I do think it comes down to characters. So to answer your question, Jack, in a really roundabout way, I want my bad guys to be memorable as people, as well as sort of threatening enemies, if that makes sense.
Excellent. There's a fight kicking off in the chat about fudging and whether it should or shouldn't happen, which is really good. And Fox is asked what the most dramatic situation is as a DM where you've just had to go with the dice rolls despite the outcome.
Ask me again in 3 weeks, James. No.
That sounds ominous.
The most dramatic situation I've had thus far.
Let's say most dramatic situation of a published episode.
Yeah. Well, this is actually not related to the podcast itself. I think the most dramatic situation I ran was again for this sort of community pub game that we have ongoing. When we were still in the pub, back in February, whenever that was, I ran a quest for a group of players which didn't have enough people on it. I ended up running a game for 2 players, and without getting too much into it, both of those players died. But they ended up in a situation where they were fighting off this massive undead monstrosity deep underground, and it was just the 2 of them. They were doing fantastically against this monster. They'd been sort of really taking the fight to it. And the monster that I was running was a carrion crawler, for anybody who's familiar with 5th edition. It's essentially a big, gribbly, maggoty slug type thing that paralyses its prey and then eats them quite horribly. And yeah, long story short, they ended up taken the fight to this thing, got it down to 5 hit points, then a couple of bad dice rolls on my end. I think I critted like 3 times or something with the monster, and then it came down to one last moment where one of the players basically had to make a con save against being paralyzed, and she rolled the con save, and it was like a 2, and we all saw it, and it was the other player who was playing. I think he was playing a druid at the time. Just sort of looked over at her dice and went, "Oh, that's it. We're dead then." And they noticed it before I did. But yeah, that's probably the most dramatic situation I've ran, where the dice have just had to stay where they were, mostly because they weren't my dice being rolled. But some of my dice rolls had contributed to that situation.
I think Jack puts it best in the chat. Tom's first time attending the Wednesday night pub game as a DM, kills 2 people, leaves like a hero.
Yeah.
Fantastic. But it's not all about dice rolls, though, is it, the game? We mentioned character and plot and things like that. So I've got a question now for you about the story that we've been playing. So Lady Argentia has been quite a significant NPC, as was Tenpenny for a while. And as they went off together, I got a sense that there might have been a little bit of a romance between the 2 of them happening behind the scenes. First question I want to ask is, was I right? And secondly, if I am right, was that part of the adventure path, or did you insert that yourself?
So I'll answer the second question first. That is definitely an insert of my own. And then to answer your first question in more detail, there is something blossoming there. It's not blatant or all-encompassing just yet. Those characters have only really known each other for two or 3 days in the game world by that point, when you think about it. But the reason I started thinking down those lines is because when you're reading Lady Argentia's backstory in the Snows of Summer, it's, well, a lot of what is said is that she was in Zimar, which is a kind of frontier town well away from the main civilization, and she was there to meet she was there to meet a suitor for her hand in marriage, and you guys didn't learn this in the game itself, but she has basically part of her reason for coming back to Heldren is that she caused a stir by basically telling this suitor to fuck off. Caused something of a scandal, and I started thinking more about why that might have been. What was wrong with this individual that she stormed out and started making her way home to Apara, and eventually, I'm not sure why, I just hit on the idea of what if she caused a scandal and caused a scene because this person simply wasn't right for her in any sense, if that makes sense. And then when she kind of got back to the High Sentinel Lodge the second time, part of the reason that she wanted to come back with you, not just because you were a party of 3 players and I wanted to balance you out of it, but that was a reason as well. But part of the reason that she wanted to come back was that in her short time in the High Sentinel Lodge interacting with some of the bandits, she had developed something of a curiosity about Tenpenny. Tenpenny was obviously very, very reluctant to be there herself, and as you all travel together en route to finding and taking down Teb Notton, they just began to bond a little bit, and certainly when Lady Argentia left the group entirely to head back to Apara proper, obviously Tenpenny was leaving the raiders as well. She was leaving them in her rearview mirror. yeah, there's still a lot that can happen there. We won't know for certain what, if anything, happens with that for quite some time. But certainly, I think there is a story to be told there, either perhaps at a much later date.
Well, the team have apparently seen Lady Argentia very, very recently, so we might find out.
You might indeed. You might indeed.
No, that's a brilliant peek behind the story curtain there. Thank you for that. I'm going to go completely left field now and go to a much more mechanical sort of question. Obviously, as a result of the pandemic, we've been playing. In fact, we've played far more games over Zoom with this podcast than we ever did in person. For you, how does GMing online compare to GMing at an actual table compare? And does it present any different challenges, or is it easier?
Ooh, where to start? It's definitely not easier. To anybody out there who is considering, either if you have been playing offline previously and you're thinking because of the pandemic you want to get into online play so you can keep it going, it's definitely worth it. But there is a fair amount of work that goes into it. It's certainly running a dynamic combat over the internet is a lot more difficult than it is, say, at a table. It's difficult. It can be difficult. It takes a lot more preparation, particularly when it comes to combat. You have to have maps drawn out. You have to have tokens and things all ready. Obviously, you don't need all those things. You can do the whole thing in theatre of the mind if you wish. But if you are the kind of group that runs sort of gridded encounters, as it were, it takes a lot more work, a lot more preparation, and it's nowhere near as flexible as it would be if you were at a table. And I think the biggest challenge I've had when running games online is it can be very difficult to feel the room, if that makes sense. And anybody who has GM'd a game before might have an idea of what I mean by that. When you're together with a group of people around a table, you can sense people's moods. You can sense how they're feeling. You can maybe get a sense of what they're about to do or what they're going to do as characters. You get a lot more interplay between characters because the people are there, they can interact with each other and all that sort of thing. Whereas when you take it all online, you lose a lot of that just because of the platform you're on. Cool. Cheers, B. Take care, mate. I hope that's been good for you.
Yes. Yeah, thanks for joining us, B Daddy. We will be posting this online, so you can hopefully find it at a later point. I'm going to write a quick thing as well on that point about the online versus at a physical. As the person who edits the podcast, when we first started recording online to protect ourselves, we were doing audio only, which, it's great, fine, it's better than no podcast. And it was one of the biggest problems I had with editing was quite often we'd talk over each other.
Yes.
And we did that a lot. Since we started doing it over Zoom, it still happens occasionally, but it's reduced quite a lot. Has that been the same for you with, you say about feeling the room? Presumably the Zoom thing has helped with that a bit.
Absolutely, yes. And not to keep harping on about it, but again, going back to the community game, that is done entirely over Discord. We don't do that with video at all, and that can get quite sticky, as I'm sure Jack in the chat would agree with.
Yeah. Okay. Well, a couple more questions, and then I think we're going to go for a little break because my decanter's empty.
Yeah, I'm out of tea, so we're going to have to fix that in just a second. But I think a couple more before we do.
Speaking of drinks, I think Alwyn's favourite item, and probably my favourite item that we've come across so far in the game, has been the bottomless stein of Caden Kalian, which was an incredible find, and it's so useful to Alwyn. Now, I'm going to ask you now, is that something that you decided to introduce yourself? Because tracking Alwyn's hip flask, because he was using that to restore his focus points, that was getting quite complicated, wasn't it? So is that something that you put into the game yourself, or was that just a really happy coincidence from the ape?
So that was something that I put into the game myself. However, I didn't just decide. I've got a follower of Caden Kalian. We're having trouble tracking the hip flask. I'm going to put a bottomless stein in. What I actually did, Stu, was, and this was a happy accident in some way, because I was like, right, when they come across this witch crow, and just to touch on that a second, there was a chance that you could have never met Lytle. If you hadn't got that survival roll horribly wrong and got really lost, you would never have seen her. But because you got lost and ended up sort of wandering around her forest, I had her appear, and I sort of had to think to myself, okay, when they encounter this creature, I already had the set piece down that she was going to try and take the one of the keys for the dancing hut, because witch crows, I don't know how much you know about the lore, if anything, but they are drawn to very powerful magic, and so she was drawn to those. She could sense them on you, and she wanted it for her nest. But I also had this idea of her being almost like a magic item trader. You know, I have this image of her having picked up all sorts of things throughout her life. And literally, I came up with a list of 3 or 4 things that she might have, and that she might offer to trade with you in exchange for your lock of hair back and stuff.
I got to say, I feel really, really bad about what happened there. That was not my choice at all.
That's it. It's fine. It's done.
It's the way it went. It's the way it went.
But yeah, back to answering that question. I literally went through the loot table. Well, not loot table. I made a loot table of all the low-level magic items in 2nd edition, and I rolled a few things, and that was one of the things I rolled.
Right. So that's brilliant. Okay, one more question, and then we're going to go for a bit of a break. And this question is from our very own Darren, who plays Brother Alwyn.
Brother Amos.
Brother Amos. Yeah, I'm Alwyn. He plays Brother Amos. And I think it's a question that always needs to be asked whenever you get a lot of questions fired at a person. What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
The airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow is 40 feet per standard action.
Excellent. Fantastic. I don't know if there's any Monty Python fans watching, but that is from Monty Python's Holy Grail that Darren asked that. Great film.
It is indeed.
Right, we're going to go for a break now, aren't we?
Yes, we are. We're going to go for a break. We're going to be back in, what do you reckon, 10 minutes, Stu?
Oh, 5? Do you reckon we can do 5?
I think we can do 5.
Don't keep people waiting too long.
That's it. So yeah, we're going to go for a break. Grab ourselves a drink. We encourage you to do the same. And yeah, we will be back in 5 minutes.
Take care. Bye.
Oh, welcome back there, folks. How are we all doing?
Hey, great to see you.
Great to see you.
Party.
There we go. Cool,
yeah,
right. So, welcome back, folks, to Tales from the 20 Side. If you have just joined us, we are an actual play RPG podcast, and tonight we are just having a little bit of a Q&A, a bit of a chat to wrap up the first part of our adventure. If you are familiar with the podcast, there are links somewhere around me. I have just been told that the link I posted in the chat earlier is dead. We're going to figure that out and see what's wrong with it. But in the meantime, if you just run a search for Tales from the 20 Side, you should find us. in one of our various guises, be that on social media, Discord, or the podcast itself.
Yeah, we'll sort that out. But certainly, if you find us on Facebook, Twitter, I know those links are working okay on the Discord. So yeah, all the links are there from there, so it shouldn't be too difficult to find us. Cool. Are you ready for some more questions there, Dom?
Yeah, let's have the next few, then, Stu.
Excellent. And I will mention, if any of you listening have a question for Dom or myself, do post it in the chat, and we will try to answer as best we possibly can. But one of the ones we got ready here, this was a question I particularly wanted to know. You might not be able to answer it, but we'll see. Has the team, as Brother Amos, Alwyn, and Otto von Niederschläger, have they hit all of the plot points of the adventure path, or are there maybe some side quests that they've missed? But I mean, what's if you had to put a percentage on it?
In terms of a percentage, you guys have actually done pretty well, believe it or not. I'd say out of the material that is in the Snows of Summer, I think you've hit a good 80-85% of stuff. You've certainly hit all the various actual story beats that there were, which is nice. I did previously mention that this adventure path, particularly the first part of it, is written in a fairly linear fashion. It assumes that our party is taking a set route through the Borderwood and then through Irison itself. I did change that up a bit. There were a lot of things that, rather than saying, "Oh, this thing happens here and then this thing happens after," I made a lot of things into a random encounter table, so that any time you were travelling somewhere, I just sort of rolled and see what you ended up with. But certainly, in terms of the story beats, you did manage to hit all of them so far.
Okay, that's really good to know. And actually, even on the side quest side, that's a much higher percentage than I would have expected. It felt like there were threads. So I'm always aware of the path not travelled,
Yes.
as it were, as a person. That always stands out. In fact, one of those was, many of our listeners might remember, the talking stag. So that was an unusual encounter. It was a brief encounter, but basically the team came across a talking stag that Alwyn tried to befriend, and to make it a bit warmer, he threw a cloak over it, noticed there was a lump on its back, and it ran off. And that was it. That was the end of the encounter. Now, I think, personally, that was a fairy folk sat on its back doing the actual talking. I don't think it was the stag that was talking. Am I right? Can you tell me?
I can tell you, actually. That particular thread has now closed. Yes, you were absolutely right, Stu. That animal was being controlled by one of the fairy folk. The only thing I will say is that, had you chosen to pursue that creature and maybe interact with it further, that could certainly have had an effect further down the line.
Right, okay. So I suppose the fact that we didn't interact with it further will have an effect.
Well, the fact that you didn't interact with it further has already had an effect. There is a reason that Radosek and Ted Notton knew so much about you before you arrived. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, interesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Actually, I said that's all I'll say. I lied. I'm going to say a bit more because I want to. So essentially, that creature was one of many spies that Ted Notton had in the Borderwood. And there is a chance, it's not certain, but there is a chance that if you had gone after that creature, discovered what it was, and silenced it in one way or another, there is a chance that you would not have been quite so high profile when you finally encountered Radosek.
Right. Oh, interesting. And that would have changed things quite dramatically. Of course, the Border Wood, the Talking Stag, the Dryad that we encountered, the Creepy Huts, the Snow Boulders, they all seem an absolute world away now. I mean, in fact, for the characters, they might as well be a world away, given how far away they are from them. And especially now that we've had the very dramatic end, and I'm being careful about spoilers here, just in case anyone's not listened to the very last episode that's been published, but the very ending of it was a very dramatic ending. And that makes it seem all much further away. So characters like the Talking Stag, the Dryad, the Creepy Hut, so on and so forth, has the team really seen the end of them never to be encountered again?
As I've kind of already alluded to, the Stag you have definitely seen the last of.
Mm-hmm.
The Dryad, possibly, depends on what you do and where you go. You might see her again. And the Creepy Hut, I am not really at liberty to say. There's a lot going on around that particular moment in the story that I'm not going to say anything about, because it could become pertinent. It could not become pertinent. We will find out.
It's stuff not to put out of our minds just yet. There,
indeed. But certainly the Stag is done. Now that you've made your way into Irison, that particular creature is serves no further purpose.
It's very friendly for a spy.
All the best spies are, Stu.
So, I mean, not that sort of thinking, planning, preparation is a big thing for the team. In fact, we as a group we seem to deal with most issues with either fist, fire, or rapier. So I'm going to ask you now: is it that the AP itself is particularly combat heavy, or is it just that we're really heavy-handed? I don't want to use the phrase "murder hobos," but we have wiped out a police force of a village.
That's very, very true. You have indeed fought the law and won for once, it would seem. But to actually answer your question there, Stu, honestly, it's a little bit of both. So when this particular adventure path, the way it's written is that certainly in the early stages, your characters are investigating kind of these strange occurrences with the unseasonable winter coming in, and everything they come across is designed to be hostile. Stuff like the fairy folk, Teb Notton. These are all things that are these are all entities that by design cannot be reasoned with, because their wants and their needs and the goals that they're trying to achieve are at direct odds with your own and with your way of life. There's a bit more nuance with some of the quote unquote human enemies. So Rokar's raiders, for example. In the adventure path, that's pretty much set up as just a massive fight between the party and this gang of bandits, and then they're almost forgotten after that. I felt like it was more interesting to see where else that encounter could be taken, and to see where you would end up. Again, once we sort of get into Irison itself, particularly the the incident with the guards in Woldsby, I would say that was very much a result of you being heavy-handed. There were certainly ways around that didn't involve you killing them all.
Yeah. I sensed that a little bit. Although I think on that instance it was really perhaps instigated by our win. Unusually. Fantastic. So Foxy is going to, I believe this relates to your answer about the velocity of an unladen swallow. It says Graham Greene would disagree.
There we go. Well, Graham Greene can tweet me and we can have at it.
He can't, sadly. He is an ex-Python.
He is.
But yeah, about friendly spies. Yeah, not about unladen swallows, about friendly spies. Or spies are friendly. Okay. That's a reference I don't get, but okay. I need to watch more Python, I really do. I'm going to ask a mechanical question now. So you've got a lot of experience, obviously. Graham Chapman, that's who I was thinking of. Graham Chapman, not Graham Greene. Anyway. So you've got a lot of experience GMing. How does GMing a podcast differ from GMing a social, normal game?
So I think I probably mentioned this a little bit earlier. And really the main difference when you're GMing for something like a podcast is that you have to remember at all times that you're performing for radio, essentially. You have to be very, very mindful that what you're doing is interesting not only for the players playing but also for the people listening at home, because they are the core consideration. Although we do this because we enjoy it, if we wouldn't put it out as a podcast if we didn't want other people to enjoy it as well, and that's always something that you have to consider when you're preparing for running and taking part in a game like this. It doesn't take that much extra effort. It's just being aware of almost over-describing everything. So, for example, when we get into combat, it's not a case of saying, "Oh, I go there and I do this." It's just being mindful that you need to add a bit more flavour into it and be more descriptive about what it is you're doing. Beyond that, I did have another thing to say about that question. How is it different from GMing social game? Yeah, kind of again running along the similar lines, that you have to be aware that you're running a game for a different medium. Is obviously our episodes, we try and keep them to about an hour and a quarter long, and that can be quite challenging to remember when you sort of get into the thick of it. There have been a few times whilst we've been recording, particularly when we end up in a big heavy combat near the end of a session. I've got Stu there tapping his watch, going, Dom, wrap it up, and I'm like, shit, I know, I'm sorry. But yeah. Other than that, there's not too much difference running this game than there would be for running a social game. The biggest consideration, as I've said, is that you are performing for radio. But that's it.
And speaking of performing, obviously as a GM, there are times when you have to give deep, emotional, meaningful speeches. And more than once we've had to stop in the middle of them for reasons. So I'm going to ask, do you deliberately pick sentences that you know will make Darren snigger like a child, knowing that his mind's permanently in the gutter?
I wouldn't say...
That is a question from Darren himself.
I know. I think that was actually the first question we got when we said we were going to do this little thing. But to answer the question, I don't go out of my way to say things that have sort of double entendres and certain and stuff. But I definitely don't shy away from it. If I start if I write a bit of read aloud text or whatever to describe a particularly nice moment, and I start reading it out loud, and I'm like, this is filthy when you think about it. Yeah, I'm certainly not going to shy away from it. It makes it quite enjoyable.
Yes. Well, he and I both are kind of like Finbar Saunders. Find several innuendos in the word innuendo.
Yeah.
Innuendo. Anyway. So, I mean, humour is obviously one of the positive aspects of the game, as is certainly for me the drama as well. But what for you would you say has been your most memorable positive moment in the game? Your most memorable, enjoyable moment?
My most enjoyable moment. Sorry, could you just quantify that a little bit? Do you mean from? I'm guessing you mean from a story point of view.
Yes, I'm going to assume the story rather than when I rolled that 20.
Yeah.
Yeah. From a storyline or from a an event point of view.
From an event point of view, I think actually, or I know I just asked if you sort of meant on a kind of story tangent, but I actually think my biggest positive moment so far in the game, excuse me, and we talked a bit about how Darren and Neil are both players who are new to Pathfinder, new to RPGs. I think for me the most memorable positive moment was when Neil, as Otto, finally found sort of a bit of the courage to start using more of his spell repertoire and start trying different things and start attempting things in different ways. And I think actually the biggest example of that was when he first transformed. Was when he first used animal form to turn into a snake. Its effectiveness in that particular combat aside, that was just a really nice moment because certainly in my head we'd had this character who sort of hangs around all the fights, throws fire at things until they fall over, and then continues on with his life. But now, certainly in that particular moment, that sort of hinted to me. Well, it hinted to me that Neil was beginning to really get the game and really to get a feel for it, if that makes sense. And sort of from a more tactical point of view for the character, it kind of represents an evolution in that character's thinking and that character's worldview.
Oh, that's a lovely answer. I like that. Like that a lot. I'm going to flip that question around to the opposite side now, because there's been more than once when I'm sure you've metaphorically been holding your head in your hands about what the team have done. So what's been your biggest for fuck's sake moment so far?
There have been a couple, you're not wrong.
Only a couple.
only a couple that have really made me go, why? But certainly the biggest one, and again, this isn't so much from a story point of view as much as it is from a player point of view. There was the moment where you guys had all arrived in Irison, you'd gone to Nadia's house, you'd had a lovely night's rest, you were feeling refreshed, you were feeling better, you'd slept somewhere safe, you were planning what you were going to do next, and you had all forgotten all the exposition that I'd given you. Usually I don't. If players forget things, players forget things. I try not to tell them what to think as much as possible. But in this particular instance, where you had forgotten almost your entire reason for being in the place in the first place, I had to sort of stop and say, no, this is why you're here. This is what you're working towards. This is where you think you should be going next. And in your defence, I think we had quite a big break from recording at that time. It was like our first session back after the big break. But it's certainly, in terms of answering your question, that was my biggest for fuck's sake moment.
That's a very understandable one. Yeah.
Yeah. As I say, I do try not to sort of constantly remind characters and players about things that have happened, but in this particular instance, there was no way that you were going to advance the story without knowing it.
Yeah. Well, I know you're very good at giving us the opportunity to make wisdom rolls or intelligence rolls, and see what we can remember and what we can. And the trouble is, you always keep ending up asking Alwyn, and those are not his strengths. Anything brain-wise, it's not his thing.
Clearly, the dice have a story of their own they want to tell there, Stu.
They really, really do. Oh dear. So I think you might have pretty much covered this one early with B Daddy's question. So the question is, what's been your biggest challenge in converting first edition to second? And do you wish you'd left it as first edition?
So as I mentioned earlier, the biggest challenge with converting it has simply just been the mechanical changes, because there's a lot of stuff from first edition in the Reign of Winter Adventure Path, and a lot of it just doesn't exist in second edition yet. And so the biggest challenge there has been converting those creatures and those NPCs to make them both effective and interesting, which by and large I think I've managed to do so far.
Yeah,
and but yeah, no. Other than that, the game itself is the adventure itself hasn't changed all that much. As I say, aside from, as I mentioned previously, where I took some of the kind of planned encounters off the linear path and made them into almost random optional encounters. But to answer the second part of your question there, Stu, do I wish I'd left it as first? I absolutely do not. I am so happy that we're playing in second edition, particularly, as I said earlier, with the fact that we've got two quite inexperienced players in our group. I remember what it was like when I first came to Pathfinder first edition. Sort of how many numbers there are and how many options there are for your character. It's enough to make your head spin, even if you are a more experienced player. I certainly have no regrets about playing this as a second edition adventure path. I would much rather take the time that I have been to convert it from first edition than run it in first edition. And I think sort of speaking more broadly about the system, I will confess I can't see myself ever going back to Pathfinder 1.
No, I'm kind of, and I'm very grateful to you for converting it, because I'm exactly the same. I just want to stick with second edition now. I had an experience quite recently. I started playing Kingmaker.
Oh yeah,
the Paizo game on the PlayStation, and of course it's based on first edition. So suddenly, you have move turns exactly the same as you would, and suddenly I'm like, "What? Hang on, where's my 3 actions gone?" It was very hard for me to get my head back round to that way of thinking, and even remembering our social game. Yeah, it's a struggle. So yes, second edition. Big up second edition.
Big up second edition. I will say, just like any RPG system, there are a few things that it gets wrong, but there's a lot that it gets right, in my opinion. I think second edition has found a lovely balance between. It's found a lovely balance between accessibility and depth.
Yeah. That action economy, I can wax lyrical
Yeah.
Now, just to say, I can't see the chat anymore in the Twitch. So if there are any questions, if you can call out.
Yeah, I've not seen anything. Last message we had was James telling us all about Graham Greene. He's an author apparently, writes spy books.
Writing spy books, yes. Fantastic. So, we have talked a lot about UGMing a podcast and kind of the differences between podcast and social games. What would you say has been the biggest lesson you've learned so far in GMing a podcast rather than a normal game?
To be honest, I think I think I've actually covered that quite a lot already. The biggest lesson I've learned in GMing podcast has been having to be mindful that I'm writing for radio. That's kind of it, really. Other than that, it's just a regular game, which is a bit of an unsatisfying answer. But I've talked to death about it already, so I shan't bore our listeners any further.
That's fair enough. Well, we've come almost to the end of our questions. So for any listeners, if you've got any questions, do fire them into chat. I'm sure Dom will see them. I don't know what's up with mine, but the one question then that I'm going to ask you is, what one piece of advice above all else would you give to anyone thinking about running a game for the first time?
Okay, so what one piece? I don't think I could give just one piece of advice, but for the purposes of the question, I will try. I can probably get it down to two good pieces.
Okay.
The first is less a piece of, well, it's kind of a piece of advice. The first piece of advice is just to do it. You know, it can be quite intimidating to do. It can be quite scary when you first start to look at it. But that's really the biggest thing I can say is if you have ever considered GMing for a game, even if you've never played as a player, and maybe you're curious about what the whole thing's about, I really would encourage you just to try it and see what happens. The first time you run a game, I won't lie, you will probably be terrible. I certainly was the first time that I ever ran a game. I was pretty terrible, sort of when I compare myself to how I run games now. But because I kind of just committed to it and decided, you know what, I'm just going to give this a go. We're going to see what happens. We're going to throw it all at the wall and see what sticks. Because I went in with that mentality of I'm just going to do it. Actually, we all had a really good time with that very first game, because, and you'll certainly come across this if you play with people, with friends or family or whatever. If those people have never played an RPG before, they won't know that you're doing a bad job. So as long as you find a way to make it fun and make it engaging, if your players are having fun, you're having fun, and if you're having fun, you've won. Is what I would say. But the second, perhaps more practical piece of advice that I would offer is always start small. Be that with group size, or with adventure, or with setting, or whatever it is. Excuse me. Whatever it is you're looking to do with Pathfinder or with any other RPG system. Start it at its most basic. Start small. You know, you might eventually build up to having a world-spanning plot where you're fighting against arch-demons from beyond the cosmos, sort of jumping all over the known universe in a starship made of butter. I don't know where your adventure might take you, but all of those adventures they all start somewhere, and it's the starting point that you should be most mindful of. You know, when your characters first start off, they're not going to be sort of intergalactic warriors of great power and renown. The chances are they're going to be they're going to be normal people who are living normal lives, and then something extraordinary happens and they have to react to it. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, is to start small, whatever you do.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. That's all the questions I had for you, unless anything's appeared in the chat, because mine's not showing still.
I've not seen any new stuff in chat. I'm just going to have a little look. It says connecting to chat. That's not a good sign.
That's what mine's been saying for quite a long time. I can see the video. Oh, yeah. Hang on. I can see the video, but it's hanging on connecting to chat. I'm sure it's out there. Well, apologies to anybody listening if you have fired questions that we just can't see. You can always jump on our Discord and find the matters very quickly. We are on there. Make sure I'm on there so I can see any questions that come in. So fire them in there. Is there anything you wanted to ask me as a player while we're on, Dom?
Not really, Stu.
We hadn't prepared that, so.
Do you know what? I think I would just ask, how have you generally been getting on with the game? How are you enjoying your experience so far?
Oh, I'm absolutely loving it. It comes with its own sort of frustrations and moments. I think podcasting has given it a different flavour to the social games I've played previously. Having to play in that 1 hour sort of segment,
yes,
almost gives it that episodic dynamic. Is a little bit different. And of course, the frustrations, because we're all really busy people, of us getting together could be interesting. And you know what? As a podcast versus a social game, I would say it's interesting because I've got half an eye on volume levels of people. Who's peaking, who's shouting into the microphone, who's turned away from the mic and is a million miles away, who's coughing. That sort of thing is always sort of on my mind a little bit. So it's an interesting, but I wouldn't change it for the world. It's so much fun doing it. Yeah, absolutely loving it.
Cool. All right. Well, that sounds like I'm just going to do one last check in case anything snuck in. That sounds like we have come to the natural end of our stream tonight, Stu. What do you reckon?
Yeah, that sounds like it.
Indeed. Well, thank you to everybody who has watched us do this thing today. It's certainly my first time doing Twitch, so it's been an experience. Hopefully, we'll get to do many more. Make sure you check out the podcast itself. We release new episodes at midnight every Saturday. The next one will be going out next week now, where we will be continuing the adventure and getting deeper into the land of Irison with our heroes and seeing exactly what's in store there. And in addition to following the main podcast, please also do check out our various social media accounts. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Stu's mentioned we have a Discord server. There's not a lot of activity there right now, but myself and Stu are at least on there near all the time at the moment, where we're all in this weird pandemic thing. Once again, thank you all for watching today. I hope this was enjoyable for you. Make sure you catch the next episode, and we will catch you all very, very soon. Have a good evening, folks. Take care.
Stay safe.
See you later. Tales from the 20 Side is a Feeble Films production in association with Juicy Falls, music by Nazar Ryback from hooksounds.com, editing by Stu Jackson. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram by searching Tales from the 20 Side or by visiting talesfromthe20side.com.